afternoon of the 25th of November, the Digital Sciences for Society program of Tilburg University, in collaboration with the Tilburg Artificial Intelligence Special Interest Group, organizes the annual Digital Sciences for Society event in the MindLabs building in the center of Tilburg. The theme of this event is Ethics in the Digital Age. It will mostly focus on the growing influence of artificial intelligence in society. This podcast is meant as a lead-in to the event. My name is Pieter Spronck. I'm a professor of computer science at Tilburg University. With me are Roos Slegers and Bart Wernaart, who are the keynote speakers for the event. In this podcast, I'm going to ask them to discuss some of the topics in AI which were suggested by students. If you wish to register for the event, then please follow the link in the description. If you are a student, I would like to recommend in particular the special session From Study to Startup. In this session, you'll discover how AI and data can play a role in entrepreneurship. There will be several student founders present who can give you hands-on insights in this topic. Well, now, let's get to the discussion. To start, Roos and Bart, can you please introduce yourself? Roos.
Thank you, Pieter. So thanks for having me here. My name is Roos Slegers, like you said. I'm an assistant professor in the philosophy department. I'm particularly interested in the stories we tell about our digital society and how those shape our relationships to new technologies and our expectations about them.
Thanks, Bart.
My name is Bart Wernaart. Thanks for having me. I'm a professor in moral design strategy at University of Applied Sciences, and we basically explore how we can measure the moral gut feeling of citizens and translate that to design principles for new technology.
Well, thanks. Now, let's get into the topics that were suggested by students. I will just summarize them because there were quite a few of them, and they tended to focus on a couple of topics. Some of the students highlighted the benefits of AI, not only for their studies, but also in daily life. One of them said that the benefits of AI offset the risks that it brings. However, most students expressed worries about AI. They pointed out increased dependency of people on AI, stating that many people now seem to rely completely on ChatGPT. One student highlighted privacy concerns, pointing out that OpenAI now wants to verify a person's identity before giving them access to adult content in AI. Several students spoke about the damage that AI does to the environment and the economy. And as far as education is concerned, it was indicated that in many programs, students let AI do their work, which teachers then evaluate using AI, basically letting AI give grades to AI products. We have only little time now, so we will not be able to discuss all these topics, but you may consider this podcast a teaser for the discussions that will take place during the event. To start with, the reliance on AI, which has increased enormously in the past years, seems to be a major concern which is underlying all of the worries expressed by students. Well, this seems to be a good opening. Can you comment on this?
I guess that a central idea should be that technology is always a choice and not something that happens to you. So from that perspective, I guess that reliance on AI is never a good idea. What maybe worries me a bit is the damage it does to epistemic safety, and that is a complicated word for can I make sense of what I look at in a safe manner. And when we use quite some AI applications, but at the same time lose the capacity to review or assess what the output is, then we have a challenge.
Sure.
Right. So maybe I can pick up on that because you just mentioned something really interesting. Bart, technology doesn't happen to you. And in a sense, true. At the same time, though, I mean, the digital natives, in a way, it did happen to them, right? I follow several interesting newsletters of Gen Zers who are basically making the case like, look, you use this as guinea pigs. Basically, let us roam free in this world where technology, there were no boundaries to access, right? No barriers to access for us. And now we are here addicted to our social media and isolated from each other, et cetera. So in a way, I think that, you broach an interesting topic here because I think it does happen to some people, right? Or we're kind of dealing with students of the age now to whom it did happen. So there's kind of a larger systemic angle which perhaps we want to take into account.
Well, perhaps then the phrase should be technology should not happen to you. And what I notice, especially in education, and even in primary education, is that kids are brought up in a manner with all kinds of social rules in a physical environment, but not so much with social rules in a digital environment. So we very often assume that what counts in an offline setting should count in an online setting, but that's not true. I mean, when you are in a classroom at a primary school, the setting is quite simple, and there are walls, literally. And so when you gain access to the online products at some point, there are no more walls, and it's almost. I think I quote someone, but I don't know who that was. It's almost the same as that you make someone drive with a car through London without a driver's license. All of a sudden, you are in that digital environment.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I heard of kids who Googled does Sinterklaas exist, and they found out the hard way that he doesn't exist. So the digital awareness became too soon, so to say.
Right. To sort of add on to that, like you mentioned, primary schools, right, or elementary school setting. What strikes me is that the teachers, for example, in my kids' primary school, they have no ideas what those kids are doing on the Chromebooks,
Exactly.
right? So you say there are walls, there are rules, but the kids are rewarded with Chromebook time, right, when they've completed their task early, and then they just start Googling away. And my kid comes home with stories about what his friends, never himself, of course, right, but have been Googling during class time. So anyway, right back to your question, Pieter, I think that reliance, it's created really early on, and I think that's extremely troubling. And so I can see the student complaint, assuming the student, I don't know if the student was talking about, people are becoming reliant or I am becoming reliant, I don't, but probably a little bit of both, right?
I
if
think
it's a concern,
it would be both. And of course, maybe the problem is not reliance, but it's over-reliance, because there's something inherent in that. So, and what do they mean with over-reliance? Probably, I expect they mean something like people don't think themselves anymore. They just assume that the AI will help them, but AI is often wrong. And as long as you think about it, then you can correct for that. But if you don't think about it, then that would be over-reliance.
Yeah.
I expect that something like that is meant.
I can imagine that. And then maybe back to the earliest, the first statement. When you, at some point, gain the capacity to choose when to use artificial intelligence products, and that you know very well what you can gain when you actually use it, that might be helpful. At the same time, I think there are at least two basic skills you would require to be able to safely use AI products. One would be high-skilled linguistic capacities. So you should be able to manipulate a system in such a way that you have a certain level of control of what is actually the output. And the second thing would be fundamental knowledge about the world in itself, because you have to be able to observe what is the output and to be able to assess the value of the output. And as long as you are not able to assess the value of the output, it is actually something that makes you maybe in an unhealthy way reliant on artificial intelligence.
Right. So I like that the way you put the question of like the difference between reliance and over-reliance, because I think there's always been sort of a moral panic around new technologies. It's like, we're becoming over-reliant. I remember when I was in high school, right, like pocket calculators, it's like, oh my goodness, nobody will be able to do math anymore if we rely on these pocket machines, which is true. Yes, absolutely.
In my case, definitely.
So is this a difference in degree or a difference in kind, right? Like I rely on my bicycle to get around on the technology of shoes, right, every day. I don't think I'm over-reliant. I'm just reliant on these things. But then what is the difference between those, technologies and this new technology? Is it its newness that also makes us sort of extra panicky? Or is it, like many people argue, I think, actually different in kind? Like we're dealing with something essentially different here, where the risk is just way higher than with other than with other technologies.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good. What we usually have the tendency to compare new technology with old technology, and then with the car, people wanted faster horses, but then they got the car. By the way, that is a quote that Ford never said, but anyway. But also the same with the cell phone and maybe the calculator. Perhaps the difference is that. But I'm not sure. We might have to talk about it a bit longer. But the difference would be that in case of a calculator, I know what it does. I don't know how to calculate, but I know that it does calculations. And in case of a cell phone, it's a little bit different even, because there are very avant-garde insights in applied psychology are used to make you dependent on something. It's addiction by design in a way. That's a different ballgame. And it's very difficult to resist this addiction by design thing. And as long as we are vulnerable for these things, I think there is a very important difference between the old technology with which we compare and the new technology that is in our hands right now.
Yep.
Yeah, maybe if we zoom into one particular area where there could be an over-reliance, which actually students indicated that they saw as an enormous over-reliance, is that education. This is for students, and education, of course, where we and the students are mostly involved with. And there was that remark that the student made and said, well, students in many programs, actually students suggested almost all programs, almost all courses, students do work with AI, so they make AI products without understanding what it is, and then teachers get these products and they use AI to evaluate them, which means that we have AI grading AI, so nobody is learning and nobody is doing any work. Now, I don't think it's completely true. I know that in my courses, students cannot use AI, but I can imagine that many programs that we run are constructed in such a way, in a classic way, that it is possible for students to use AI for almost all their work. So, and I can imagine that teachers also are looking for how can I use AI to help me grade stuff. So this is, I think, something that we can say a lot about. And well, you're from Fontes, you are from Tilburg University, so we have different areas of education where we're coming from. So, what can you say about this?
Well, I think that we should avoid a situation that we train people to be very good in asking something to ChatGPT.
Sure.
So that's imminent, yeah. But it might be what is happening at some point. So I think that the capacity. Look at the world's problems at the moment. They are very complicated. There are complex problems that involve all kinds of areas. There is a reason we want people to work in a multidisciplinary setting and so on. So problems are increasingly complicated, but the capacity to actually sit down, reflect on something, read a text that is longer than 2 or 3 sections, but for instance a book, and actually to be not distracted all the time with short-term issues. I think that is something we are losing, and there is a reason why we want people to write a thesis. It's not per se because of the thesis in itself, but it is actually what you learn in writing the thesis, and what you learn in reading long text, and what you learn in being reflective. And I think these capacities are extremely important when you want to solve these complicated issues. And when you lose that kind of a capacity, I doubt whether you will also be able to solve these complicated issues.
Yeah, I very much agree. And I also think, I think this is just an extension of what you're saying, but there's sort of this naive idea that that talking or writing is just externalizing the thoughts that you have in your head, right?
Yes, exactly.
Whereas in fact, you as you're writing, you're thinking. Your ideas are becoming clearer as you're putting them into words, or as you're speaking, preferably to another person, and who's giving you feedback, or you're actually in conversation, and it involves listening. So this idea that you can just sort of outsource something to ChatGPT because, oh, you have the idea, but you can just sort of externalize it through a technology. No, you're actually not thinking clearly if you're not yourself putting it into words in speech or in writing. And so that is a skill that obviously we want to teach, like you're saying, Bart. And then but this is maybe sort of the privilege of my field, of our field, right, in philosophy, where you can actually go back to basics, right,
Yes.
and use this AI revolution to cut out, let's face it, the kind of bullshit parts of education, where, teaching to the test, students studying only for grades, but bring it back to conversations, right? Writing assignments, but in class,
And talk
like,
about it.
holding a pen. I
Yeah.
mean, well, accepting those who need a keyboard because of accessibility, et cetera, of course,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But I see it as an invitation, right? These worries that these students, I think, are rightly pointing out. I also see it as an invitation to, okay, what actually do we want to teach these students? What do or what should they come to us to learn? Let's bring it back to that, right? And it doesn't mean that you don't use AI, right? It just means you use it in a different way, and not as the part that is graded, obviously.
Well, perhaps, but I'm not sure what you think about that. The yardstick could be if you use AI for efficiency, maybe it's the wrong path. If you use AI to better learn something, then it's a better path.
Right. And how do you have? I mean, not to put you on the spot, but
Oh, no,
to
yeah.
better learn it, how would you use it to better learn something?
There are a couple of things you could do. So, for instance, what I like is personalized AI applications where you can have your own mind map or academic memory, and you can search through that academic memory and make sure that you that what you have been reading all the time is stored in such a way that you can actually make a lot more sense out of it than you would normally do if you have to remember it by heart all the time. But then it's personalized, and it's not the mass thing that you usually use. Those kind of applications might be a bit more helpful.
Maybe so. Actually, I think that there are a couple of things that some might say. So one thing that people might say, or students might say, is, yeah, but you talk now about the importance of these classic skills of being able to read and being able to understand. But I have AI for that. I don't need to do that anymore. Now, I think we can fairly quickly agree that that is a mistake, that AI is not smart at all. It's called artificial intelligence, but it's not smart, so it will make stupid things. And then you cannot rely on that. But so a student might say, look, I have to read this big book, and let AI just give me a summary, and I just read a summary. And we know that these summaries are often simplifying certain things, and you actually cannot learn from it what you want to learn. So now you already, Roos, gave an idea of what we could do to, if we can convince students of the importance of these skills, how we could potentially make sure they still gain these skills.
Right.
But I think convincing that is important is also important, because if they then leave the university without knowing that it is important to be able to do this, they then start to rely on AI, and you get these problems.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, just a very small but maybe effective way. I'm really glad you brought up the summary, right? Like, so the difference between reading a book and reading the summary of the book is that, sure, you can fake it in a conversation that you've read it, but you haven't enjoyed this book. You haven't taken in this book. And a lot of students might say, well, who cares, right? Like, because I'm tested on a plot or whatever. But then if you talk to them about a song they really love, you can describe that song in words, right? You can discuss the technical elements. You can say, oh, this is what the song is about. But if you haven't heard the song, you don't know the song, and you also haven't been moved by it. So it's a subtle thing, but something I think we all recognize is the difference between being moved by something and being uplifted and surprised and experiencing wonder or what have you, and a sort of alienating sense of, having been super efficient, and now you can pass the test on the song and say that it was in G minor or whatever, right? But you've distanced yourself from a wonderful bit of reality, which could have actually made a difference to you in your day. And I think we all have experienced that, where, we've outsourced something like that. And then you feel alone, right? You feel actually kind of removed from reality. So I think that element of alienation is actually pretty easy to expose people to, because we've all experienced it, and you can even do it sort of in class. And of course, you can always cut corners. Students have always been able to cut corners. But if that intrinsic motivation, I do think, that could be part of the conviction, right? Or at least that's my hope.
Yeah, but I think that's a very good point. And perhaps in addition to that, you also keep yourself away from, I call it collateral learning. I mean, and it sounds really silly and old-fashioned, but when I earned my PhD degree, I had to analyze all parliamentary history since the 50s.
Good time,
It was about human rights. And back then it wasn't even digitalized, so I had to really go down to a library, literally down, because there were stairs, and I had to climb down and blow away the dust and read through all the parliamentary history. And I did a lot of collateral learning because I didn't only focus on the human right aspect, but I also focused on the complete context. And now I understand the complete context. Now I could basically ask ChatGPT to summarize all parliamentary history in a particular field, and I probably could get a very decent report about it. It would work, but I didn't live through it. And this is where people are different from artificial intelligence, and especially large language models. Basically, an LLM predicts language. That's it. It doesn't live through life or whatsoever. And when we lose the ability or keep ourselves away from the ability to live through things, we are probably not much better than the AI in itself. And that's, I think, a huge risk.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot more that can be said, but that has to wait until the event. We don't have a lot of time for this podcast. Are there any concluding words that you would like to speak?
Well, just maybe briefly, I think that a word we haven't really mentioned, but that's so closely tied to much of this, is loneliness and isolation, right? That I think the reason students are raising these particular questions is because even though we all know it's easier to use these technologies, like an easy life is not necessarily a fulfilling one. And maybe that sounds super cheesy and kind of old-fashioned, but I do sense in our students oftentimes kind of a hunger for something different. But where do you find it in a world that's so dominated by these technologies that are constantly offered to you at every corner, right? And you should come to the event to learn more about this.
Yes, yeah, sure. Maybe one thing that we also didn't mention is the moral programming of technology. So there is a moral agenda when you program technology, even if you don't want to. And I think a very important question is who gets to decide the moral programming, in this case of ChatGPT or any alternatives. There is now a discussion about Wikipedia with a certain political profile and its competitor.
And Grokpedia.
Yes, exactly. And this is typically an example of moral programming. And when you use or interact with this kind of technology, you should be really aware of the moral programming and how you relate to that moral programming.
Well, thank you. So once more, the Digital Sciences for Society annual event will take place on the 25th of November in the Mindlabs building in the center of Tilburg. It starts at noon, ends around 5:30. The program can be found through the link in the description, which is also where you can register. For students in particular, there is the session From Study to Startup, which will delve into the use of AI and data in entrepreneurship. I hope to see you all there.